Zeno was a philosopher 2,500 years ago, one of the old Greek philosophers, and he had a bunch of arguments about space and time and continuity and discreteness and all of that. The one argument I really like is the race. Okay, so there's going to be a race. The two people who are going to have a race is Achilles, and Achilles is going to race the turtle. I must say the turtle looks pretty streamlined, but anyway, the turtle is slower than Achilles, so or tortoise, I think it was tortoise. All right. But see, Achilles was nice, right? Achilles said, "Well, I know I'm faster, so let's make this, interesting. I'll give you a little head start." All right. So, what's going to happen? Who will win this race? Of course, we all say, well, it depends on how big of a head start and how different in speed it is and how far of a distance, they need to run, yada, yada, yada. Give us the numbers, we'll figure it out, right? We'll just calculate it and with it. Okay, but Zeno said, no. No matter how fast Achilles is and no matter, how much faster he is than the tortoise, Achilles is just not going to win. This is not going to happen. This is impossible. Why? Okay, well, so let's say Achilles is here now, right, and the tortoise is here. So then Achilles is behind, right? So Achilles needs to make up that distance. Well, guess what? Once Achilles has covered that distance, the tortoise has moved, right? How much? Well, not as much as Achilles has moved, but still, some amount, right? So Achilles says, shoot, I'm still behind. Okay, let me make up that distance though, right? Because I want to win. In order to win, I first need to make up the distance that I'm behind. First I need to catch up with the tortoise before I can actually overtake the tortoise and actually win. But guess what? Achilles is now to that point, but the tortoise has moved ahead a little bit itself, of course, right? And you see what's going to happen. We get an infinite regress, right? We can play this game an infinite number of times. That is, there are an infinite number of points in space as well as in time at which Achilles is behind the tortoise. And these are all successive, right? These are all successive points in space and time. In other words, first Achilles needs to do this one thing, and then Achilles needs to do another thing, and then another thing, and then another thing, and then another thing. And how many things? Infinitely many, right? An infinite number of things need to happen in succession before Achilles can catch up with the tortoise, let alone pass the tortoise, let alone get to the finish. Which, by the way, isn't going to happen either, right? Because even if Achilles catches up with the tortoise, okay, fine, Achilles has caught up with the tortoise. I just need to get to the finish. Well, sorry, Achilles, before you can get to the finish, first you need to go get halfway. And even if you reach that point, well, first you need to do one more thing, which is to get to the halfway point of that. And even if you reach that, you need to do one more thing, Achilles, one more little thing, get to the half point of that before you actually get to the finish. And so here you see we get an infinite number of things that Achilles has to do here too. And that's even if he catches up with the tortoise, which already is not going to happen. How can you get beyond an infinite sequence? That's the very definition of infinite. You're never going to finish. It's like saying, Bram, here's a nice six-pack for you. If only you can finish counting all the numbers. So I'm like, oh my God, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? And I go faster and faster, and I go incredibly fast, right? Because I really want that six-pack. Will I ever get my six-pack? Of course not. I will never be done. Right? The same logic with Achilles. There's an infinite number of things that have to happen in sequence, and somehow we need to get beyond that in order for Achilles to take over the tortoise. So that's not going to happen. In fact, here's how bad it is. Any movement from point A to point B is impossible, right? Any movement from A to B of any object will have to involve getting beyond an infinite number of actions or events. But if you can't move from any point A to any different point B, what does that mean? That basically motion is ruled out. There is no motion, it seems like, by this argument. Now, a lot of people interpret Zeno as, wow, so Zeno's arguing that motion is impossible? Actually, no, he didn't. All of this was Zeno's argument a proof by contradiction argument to argue that space and also time are not what is called dense. What does dense mean? That between any 2 points in space or any 2 points in time, there's always another point of space or time. Space and time are sort of infinitely divisible. This is what Zeno did. He said, let's assume that space and time are infinitely divisible. Well, then I can point to scenarios like this to argue logically that motion becomes impossible. But guess what? Motion is possible, right? We know this. So here's the argument, right? If space and time are infinitely divisible, then motion is not possible. We do know that motion is possible, right? So there's a contradiction. Therefore, what follows? The assumption is wrong. The assumption of what? That space and time are infinitely divisible. Apparently they're not. That was his argument. To me, it's kind of a profound argument, right? And philosophers and physicists are still debating it, like what's going on. The mathematicians will always go like, whatever, calculus, here's an infinite series, add up all the things, right, and it's finite, right? But that's totally and utterly missing the point of this argument, right? It's totally avoiding the fact that we have an infinite sequence that somehow we try to go through, right? Of course you can have infinitely many things at once, and the sum of an infinite number of terms can be a finite amount. Sure, we get all that. But then, of course, with the very starting point of Zeno, he said, here's a finite distance, and if space and time are infinitely divisible, then that means that I can divvy up this finite distance into infinitely many things. In fact, some people have the audacity to claim that the old Greeks were somehow too stupid to realize that an infinite number of terms could add up to some finite amount. No, this was the very starting point of Zeno's argument. And then, of course, you got people who say, Zeno seems to be arguing that motion is impossible. He must have been wrong. Up yours, Zeno, I am moving, so there, right? All you're doing is emphasizing the paradox here, right? The paradox between our intuition that space and time are infinitely divisible and the actuality that, of course, we can move, right? All you're saying, yes, we can move. Yeah, we know we can move. The question is, how is this compatible with our intuition that space and time are infinitely divisible? Zeno argued it isn't, and space and time are not infinitely divisible. What does modern physics say about that, by the way? Is that a notion that has crept into modern physics, that space and time may not be infinitely divisible? You betcha, quantum physics, right? So 2,500 years before quantum physics, right? Zeno basically made the argument already that space and time must be something like that, right? On purely logical grounds. No, not purely logical. He needed one observation to make the argument. And that is what? That things move. Things move, therefore quantum physics, right? Is basically Zeno's argument.